It's a pleasure and an honor both to be here. The theme, which is going to link the storytellers that you're going to be hearing, is outsiders. And in order to tell stories about your own life, of course, you have to create yourself a kind of outsider. You have to put yourself outside of yourself and then look back in again, which can sometimes be a scary thing to do. Tabatha Southey writes satirical columns that are a delight. She is a bull's-eye, reliable archer. Please welcome Tabatha Southey.
When I was about 14 years old, I read a book that I now recognize to be Kate Millett's Sexual Politics, which contained a chapter on the sexual subjugation of women in literature. And I thought, that is hot. Later, I was to read all the works of Henry James, looking for the works of Henry Miller, Daisy Miller, well, that's just the sort of mistake you make when you're reading in the dark. I read in the near dark of my bedroom down a short hall from my parents' room. I feigned a humiliating fear of sleeping in the pitch black after my big brother left our shared bedroom and ran off to live in the basement. The post-bedtime reading calculation involving the amount of light needed, bathroom or just hall light, and the width my bedroom door had to be ajar was a constant challenge. If the door was open too wide, I lost the split-second lead time it took to hide the book under the covers should one of my parents come to check on me. If the door was shut too far, I misread Roald Dahl's Danny the Champion of the World and believed that it was possible to write a funny, sweet story about a boy and his father who live in a caravan behind their semi-rural car garage and who hunt and eat peasants. The agreement my parents and I hammered out allowed the bottom corner of my bedroom door to be left open to the point where it lined up with the northern corner of my carpet, which I later shifted a few inches in my favor. The bathroom light could stay on, my mom agreed, but the bathroom door had to be closed. The hall light was a given, and sometime during my John le Carré phase, I fetched the ladder and secretly switched it to a 100-watt bulb. Our house was small, although inexplicably the basement, to which I eventually lost all of my brothers, was big. In the sloped ceiling upstairs part of the house, the sound of a page being turned traveled like bad news, and my door light speed calculation had to account for that. Even now, when I'm reading by the light of my choice in my own home, I catch myself pausing after each turn, straining my ears for a sign that I've been caught. I listen fearfully for someone to shout, "It's bedtime!" Or worse yet, the still, absolutely horrifying, "You have school in the morning." I learned to make a covering sound at the end of every page. Yawn, turn page. Cough, turn page. Snuffle, turn page. My parents thought I was asthmatic. I later learned that this was the reason why I was never allowed to join the warren of brothers in the damp basement where, hidden away, I could have switched on the bedside lamp and tackled all of those Russian names and French marriages on surer ground. It's not that my parents were anti-reading parents. They weren't. The before-bedtime reading of English books by English writers was encouraged. My mother believes the world of books can be summed up this way: English writers, good. North American writers, bad. It's much the same with television. English television, good. North American television, bad. I, Claudius, good. Are You Being Served? Equally good. I read the semi-pornographic multi-volume novelization of Upstairs, Downstairs in the full view of my parents. In fact, I may have been the only child in the world with D.H. Lawrence on the bedside table and Farley Mowat hidden under the mattress, where I lay over him waiting for the perfect bulb, watt, open door, full moon, drape, gap, alignment, always hoping for a baby brother to cry and smother the sound of the pages being flipped so recklessly over. And so that, to me, is the promise of summer. It's the day stretched out long, like an exhausted animal, the light still coming in through pale curtains, and me in my bed, knees camping in my white cotton nightie, reading, pleading with the sun so suddenly patient to stay with me until the end of the last chapter.
Paul Krasner is a cultural treasure, the founder of the Realist magazine, which had a long run of more than 40 years, a co-founder with Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin of the Yippie movement, a colleague and collaborator with Lenny Bruce. He edited Lenny Bruce's autobiography. He had occasion to drop acid, or so I'm told, with Groucho Marx. How I wish I could have been there. He's a social satirist, free speech advocate. He's been published in any number of magazines, in Rolling Stone and in Playboy and Mother Jones. And he's written several books. Please welcome Paul Krasner.
Like other editors, I was willing to tolerate Hunter Thompson's irresponsibility in the process of presenting his talent. In 1997, at a memorial for Allen Ginsberg that I emceed, Thompson, true to his reputation, was supposed to make an appearance, but he didn't show up. Johnny Depp, who played him in the movie version of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, did show up. I told the audience that I was disappointed because I was hoping to present Depp, Thompson, and Bill Murray, who played him in Where the Buffalo Roam, all standing together, and then I could say, "Will the real Hunter Thompson please fall down?" In 2005, I learned of Thompson's suicide when the Associated Press culture correspondent phoned to ask what my reaction was. As he would write, quote, "I'm stunned," said Krasner, who was nearly speechless for several minutes after hearing the news. "It's hard to believe I'm referring to him in the past tense." This was on a Sunday evening in the middle of a 3-day President's Day holiday weekend. I don't know who else or how many others the reporter had called before or after me, but apparently I was the only one who happened to be accessible at the time. As a result, the AP report was dispatched. I was deluged with interview requests from print, radio, and TV outlets. Each time, I found myself uttering some new observation, if only to keep myself from getting jaded. During one call, I said, "Hunter was larger than life, sort of like a Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade float." On the next call, I said that and added, except that it was filled with nitrous oxide. Among the interviews was NPR's All Things Considered. After it was broadcast, I learned that I was considered, quote, big enough now to merit the preparation of an advance obituary for NPR. I don't take it personally. This is a purely pragmatic practice in the media world. I'll be right up there with Charlie Manson, who is certainly a high achiever in his own field of endeavor. My personal definition of success is simply trying to do the appropriate thing every moment. As Ken Kesey once told me, my energy is what I do. My image is what other people think I do. A radio journalist was given the assignment to put me in the can. He allowed me the rare opportunity of fact-checking my own obituary. I asked him if it would be possible to include my website. Actually, I was slightly disappointed that my electronic obit didn't mention my role as an underground abortion referral service when it was illegal, because that was such a turning point in my life. I had crossed a line from satirist to activist. When I was 70, I wrote a piece for the AARP magazine, Modern Maturity. My subscription copy arrived, the issue in which my article was supposed to be featured, but it wasn't in there. I checked with my editor, who asked how old I was. I told her I didn't understand what difference that would make. She explained that there were 3 editions, one for readers 50 and over, one for readers 60 and over, and one for readers 70 and over. I was too old to read my own article. There was a time when I was considered too young to read certain things, and now I'm considered too old to read certain things. Obviously, something must have happened to me in between. like, say, most of my life. Once a short-lived magazine, Cheetah, published a fake obituary of me. An Associated Press reporter called, and I explained that it was a hoax. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Of course," I replied. "I'd tell you if I was dead." A radio talk show host was taking phone calls, and listeners were discussing whether that obituary was legit. Someone called and said, "You know, I didn't even know that Paul Krasner was alive until I heard that he was dead." And at that precise moment, my sense of false humility was restored. Thank you.
One of the things that risks happening with somebody who has been as important to film and television and theater in this country as Gordon Pinsent, and somebody who really began honing his craft here in Winnipeg, is that we tend to risk taking them for granted. It pays us well to step back and to look at these big careers and think, oh my Lord, so much has been accomplished, and that's certainly true with Gordon Pinsent. When you think of the Rowdy Man, which became so important to so many Canadians, and to all the work that he's done subsequently, both in TV and in film, and as a writer as well. Please welcome Gordon Pinsent.
Well, thank you very much, Winnipeg. Spent 8 years here. Every town, I suppose, has its characters, and we had one. I've called this the first leg over. Someone got that. Sterling stood there for the longest time, simply staring through the clouds of dust to the construction that had taken over the trail he had walked once a day since memory. He didn't think of canceling his walk, just made sure the workers saw him shake his head a lot. He'd become intimately familiar with the curves and rockage of his path, so it took him half an hour to decide to take the new untried one. But this he did, and those feet were up to it. Sterling Lane had stayed young for a long, long time, way past when his birth date said he should. There was something spooky about him. At age 70, he'd showed only the faintest of hairline wrinkles. Nothing you could put down to serious aging. What a nuisance for his calendar contemporaries in the meantime. They wondered for a time whether he might have jogged down to the Big Apple from one of your nips and tucks, but he never left their sight. I say jog because he was not an air traveler, nor a traveler of any other kind, but he certainly could have hoofed it. His mother wondered too. Thought he had a mind set on eternal. 70, he still called her mommy, which of course she'd been for the length of his age and was sick of it, without saying as much ever, not wanting to see a mental shift happen to him where he'd become a liability to her. And still, there was nothing that Mommy could complain about. He was a fine provider, a considerate son, neat as a live-in nurse, had never had parties of people in, he'd never brought a woman home. She was a bit ashamed of this, to be honest. My God, his father had never let up in that department. But there was no explaining this one, and she didn't fancy being seen as a mother to one of those, if that's what he was. If he was in that closet, would have been a pretty damn deep closet for him not to have climbed out of there by now. Truth was, he'd never allowed himself to get close enough to the women to experience their reason for even being shaped like that. All that uncomfortable stuff aside, and before doing anything else on this day, the old virgin took his walk. He thought he'd never taken this particular trail ever. And he'd forgotten why, but it was flooding over him again. A new sweat pumped forth at the memory of it. And here he was, setting foot on the very trail that had taken credit for the nightmares of his youth, brought on by members of a family of vile-minded idiot boys and a boy-eating daughter. Sterling even stammered mutely in recalling their name, Coben. But Sterling certainly wasn't going home without a walk of some kind. Plus, that family had vanished since then, died off most. On his usual trail, he would not have heard it. Hooray, hooray, the 1st of May. Outside loving starts the day. This caused him to stumble and stop. I beg your pardon? Someone was standing in his path, causing him to put the brakes on. A Coben. Impossible. And by God, it was, unless he was mistaken, the boy-eating daughter, Lena. It came rushing up his spine and out on his tongue as freshly as it had no less than 60 long summers before, and one standout, irreversible, and spine-softening face-to-face, when he might have been altered forever in mind and body had he not found his way out of it by begging. The path had turned to sponge under her impatient bare feet, and those eyebrows were as black as ever, although she could certainly wear them better than the rest of her crowd ever did. But wait, if he was in his 7th, 8th decade, then Lena Coben would be very close by a few years less. And why didn't she look it? He was always secretly smug regarding his own well-kept countenance. Had she managed the same? It was quite incredible. The skin tight, the hair healthy, lustrous, amazing, eyes as bright as ever, and for this moment at least, not as threatening. She'd been spit out of that day in the past, no mistake, in their youth, when he had seen her last, now standing here in front of him to unmake his day. Was she now back to finish something started long ago with him? To give the one gift, perhaps, she knew how to give, in order to face her own end in a state of greater contentment. What did this mean? Did Sterling have what she was looking for? Perhaps something had kept her from having the life she'd wanted all this time, and felt she'd have to return to the place of her youth to find a proper way out again. Perhaps she had lived with the almost sacred conviction that had she and Sterling done it at that time, 50 years to this hour and day, when the heavens screamed out for it to happen, then she could have had a normal life. He sifted through this possibility in his mind. He had no absolute proof that this was it, but being Sterling, he would attempt to see a sweetness to it all. He hadn't heard anything of the family in absolute ages, and he said as much. Disarming her might work. Did you have a good Christmas? She'd wanted to get on with it in whatever form it would turn out to be. I've got something for you, said she. Is that right? And you got something for me, she allowed. What's that? I didn't bring anything with me, but I could go home and get it. Wouldn't take me long. I'm fast. I know you're fast. Remember, but what I want you brought with you, and it's something that could straighten it all out for the two of us. What happened next must have come close to him, how it could have been during the creation. With himself in the eye of it, at once swirling, throbbing, then near blinded by colors he'd never known before, their nerve ends brushing, inventing an aurora borealis of exquisite poetry, of what would seem to be endless, imperishable beauty. And then, an ever-increasing series of volcanic movements from them both, till all surrounding sight and sound had all but deserted their senses, replaced by only the very present and deeply intimate emanations of what, to the distant ear, could only be that of the mutually engrossing between the sheeter. Of the mythical bestial sort. And there was no question that Sterling had been handed a gift that he could only articulate as, Mother of God, what's my name? That evening at supper, Sterling found himself telling his ancient mother all about his little outing. Yes, all. He felt he just had to. And this caused his very surprised mommy to laugh, strangely but genuinely. And from then on, during meals, Sterling would invariably add women until the ends of whatever topic was on the go, which would cause him to squirm and flush all over again and dash away mid-sentence to the small room. Returning and smiling all aglow, but unable to do the dishes. He had shown a side of himself to Mother she had been waiting to see, and she was glad for him, and evermore nicknamed him Screwed to Death.